All right, we're live. Welcome, everyone, to the HashiCorp Ambassador Thought Leader Series. We've got our most esteemed community members and experts talk to us about the big ideas in this space, in this knowledge space. So everything, infrastructure, networking, application, security, techniques, principles, lessons learned, all sorts of stuff that we hope that y'all, the audience, can make use of. I've got someone here with me. As usual, we'll introduce him here in just a second because we have to, of course, address the fact that we want you to interact with us, of course. However, we do need you to follow our community guidelines. That means be a good person, right? Be welcoming, inclusive, friendly, patient, be considerate, respectful. And now I'm just reading the banner on the screen instead of being present. So just read the link there if you need more information on how you can be a good citizen of the internet and HashiCorp community. Also, this is being recorded, so when it's done, you'll be able to see us again on YouTube and all of our other channels once it's finished. But let's go ahead and introduce our guest today, if you will, good sir.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Barnaby. I'm one of the ambassadors. Obviously, I wouldn't be on this ambassador series otherwise. But I also work in the sort of DevOps engineering, platform engineering space. Also one of your Vault trainers. So do a lot with secrets and identity management. So we'll kind of, today I think we're going to be talking a little bit about pulling that together. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Yeah, we do. We're going full-blown security today. I mean, when you say that, security's got a lot to it, so we could go in a lot of different directions. But specifically, you know, what's first up, more to that guest introduction. I met Barnaby like years ago at this point, which is just wild how much time flies. So
HashiCorp 2020, which was out in LA. It was the first one over after COVID that was in person. So it was a big one.
it was a while ago. Now we've got you here on the stream, you're ambassador, and it's going to be a good one. And so in terms of what we're talking today, if you've seen the show before, you know that we like taking one really, really big idea and then breaking it down into 3 sub ideas. So Barnaby, what is your big idea? What's the topic of the day that you'd like to tell everyone about?
So we're looking at where to trust in your platform. So platform engineering is becoming much bigger and bigger. Recently, everyone's talking about these platforms, knitting all these bits together. And today we're going to look at how sort of trust fits into that and how it can help you run a more secure platform, but not only run your platform in a more secure way, run it in a way that's faster for the people that are using it and makes their life easier.
Which is such a refreshing approach from kind of the general conversations that we have when we talk about trust. Not that it doesn't get included in the topic. It's just often when someone comes in terms of trust and security, they want to stay in just that lane. Sometimes the platform will come into it, but more specifically, only sometimes will the ancillary benefits of, you know, speed, right? Developer productivity, right? The entire organization's productivity. Those won't always get mentioned. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Barnaby's thoughts on that. And so in terms of importance, so Barnaby, I feel like your topic, as soon as we pull someone like Lockie White on here, who is watching, by the way, he just said that with a name like Barnaby, how could you not trust him? So
parents did well on that one. Set me up for success with this.
Yeah. For the TDMs out there and the business decision makers, that vibes pretty well. But if I'm a developer, right? If I'm an engineer and not, why should I care about this? What is this going to do for me?
It ideally, when it's done well and set up in a good manner, it will make their lives easier because it should remove friction from the use of the platform for them. And if you set up the trust relationship, it's right, they will authenticate into the platform at one point, and then they will never really have to care about it again. And everything should run seamlessly behind the scenes, but also seamlessly in a secure way. It's very easy to get things to run seamlessly if everything can talk to everything. But this is seamless, but it also should be secure. So if you spend the time to build this correctly and put the trust into your platform at the right points, you can make your developers' lives easier. And it's a little bit like how we've seen testing shift left over the years. is it's now sort of bringing that security, shifting it left, and sort of integrating it into the process to make it more seamless and just part of that flow that you're used to.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? What's interesting about that is, even though we didn't really talk about that in our preliminary discussions, that is exactly what it is here, because we'll get in here very soon in terms of some of the structure and foundations. But he was very much like, Barnaby's like, we need to do this stuff up front because it's going to determine a lot of other things later. So it's actually going to be pretty cool. So I like why should the audience care? It is so that you can ultimately not care, right? Was that just that?
In a nutshell, it kind of is. If you set it up correctly at the start and you build it, you then kind of don't have to really think about it, or you'll only think about it when something pings and goes, this is broken, or something's gone wrong in the background. Your day-to-day use case, you shouldn't have to worry about security. And it kind of ties into platform engineering as a whole for the developer experience. It's trying to abstract away as much from them as possible. And I think Hashi touched on this widely with some of the infrastructure side of things, where they try and hide as much of the plumbing and the behind the scenes from the developers, so developers can just focus on developing. And this is kind of hiding that security layer behind the scenes as well with that. So just allowing them to spend more time focusing on their development work.
Yeah, very nice. And and we're also going to get some of his thoughts here in the middle idea around applying this technically, so that you can kind of get an idea of what the wiring and in this case is his analogy is the plumbing. Not like my cable management, which I've gotten criticism about, which is not that great. It works. It's very visible though. But anyhow, let's get into this first topic. The way we're going to do this is, when Barnaby set up his structure for how he want to introduce his ideas, there's obviously high level, mid-level, and then low level. The low level being closest to the developer, the everyday engineer. The high level being folks that just want to see sort of more results and the outcomes. We're actually going to start kind of right in the middle. Not only are we going to start right kind of in the middle, we also need to set up some context so everyone understands everything else, right? But this first idea, Barnaby, in addition to us, kind of setting out some definitions in terms, what is the first sub idea under this big idea of how trust and security play into your platform, teams, organizations, and the like?
Yeah, so I guess the first point is we need to define a few things. So we talked about a definition, and and they will tie into what we're looking at. So a lot of the things we'll mention, for those of you familiar with Vault, these terms will be very familiar. For those of you that aren't so familiar, we'll touch on these. So it's talking about identity sources. So what can you use as a source of identity? How do you prove who you are in a system? An entity, something moving through a system, and its sort of existence, whether that be a user, an application, or a machine. And then kind of the big talking point that we're going to go into more detail and where the real value comes of this is the trust relationships between components of your system, and how allowing one bit of your system to trust another can help speed up the interactions between those components.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because when we're talking about trust here too, obviously humans are involved, regrettably. But there's a lot about machine to machine as well, right? This isn't just about trust and identity and these in context of flesh and blood, but also machines and the like. Which hopefully is obvious, since clearly Barnaby's already mentioned Vault. This is HashiCorp. We've probably mentioned Vault. Well, we have mentioned Vault and the like. So, yeah. So in terms of, there was one sort of thing, and you tell me if this is the appropriate time to dive into it, because when we came to this particular talk, I was like, well, since we kind of catch a lot of different audiences with this talk, some of these things are going to be very, very obvious to others. Some of these maybe not so much, and let's make sure we have the context. In terms of third-party verified identity, right, versus direct, that'd be a really good area if you don't mind going into that particular example in showing us and using these terms of identity, entity, and trust relationship, just so folks can get a real-world example of something that at one point, we kind of wanted to be everywhere, and now we really can have it everywhere, right?
Yeah, so sort of talking about identity brokers and that landscape and how that fits together. And a lot of people will use these tools in their everyday without even realizing it. The easy example in your day-to-day is when you see that little sign in with Google button. The website that you're logging into isn't validating who you are directly. Google gives you an identity, so you will pass some credentials through from Google. The website will then reach out directly to Google to check that that information is correct and has been signed by the appropriate authority. And if it is, it then gives you access to that website, or it trusts you are who you say you are. So in that case, you're using Google as a trusted sort of identity provider. It knows who I am because I have my Gmail account in this instance, and then the website can verify that based off the information that you sent to it. But we'll be looking at this probably more in the context of machine-to-machine authentication and the various platforms and things you have in place that can act as an identity broker in these scenarios. So some of the obvious ones that we'll talk about later a little bit are, you have your cloud platforms. They can prove an identity of a machine. And the one that we'll go into even more detail in is talking about stuff like CI pipelines. They're often run from a centrally managed platform. It knows what the pipeline is, and it knows the sub area it lives in, so it can prove that identity when you're using that to try and gain access to something else.
Yeah. So I think this is, I'm going to ask you a question. First, let me sort of step back. So we have Barnaby, and we're going to go into this. And you already mentioned I was going to say trigger word, but it's keyword. That's the right word for this. Keyword, CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration deployment being something we're going to go in. That's going to be kind of our low level focus, because a lot of these trust relationships, well, I mean, it's just a good place for us to zoom in on them. But we have a system. I'm saying this generally, all these different machines, sometimes humans, but we're going to focus on machines, reaching out to other machines, right? And services on those machines. When one machine goes to another service, there's a lot of interactions that happen. There's a lot of trust that has to happen. Okay. When we're talking about third party, right, we're talking about there exists an external authority, something like Google, that one of these machines reaches out to, vouches for it in essence, gives this identity back, and then allows it to participate into the system. So this is the third party way. How does this, what are the benefits and the benefits or costs, I guess, or maybe cons of doing what you refer to as like direct, right? Just directly verifying identity and the like.
So to do it directly, the problem or the issue that arises is that you have to have everything contained within the machine that's identifying. And if we're living in a world where these are short-lived, you essentially are injecting these very often. And to do it in a way that it's secure for that machine, but it's very difficult for anything else to do it. It's very difficult because it's all self-contained. So if you take that self-contained bit out of that machine, in theory, you have enough information there to pretend to be that machine. Whereas if you're using a third party, it validates your identity for you. So on the machine that's running the application itself, it doesn't physically have any credentials attached to it. It reaches out to an identity provider service that it's running with to get information to prove who it is, and then that can be validated with that third party. So you're offloading some of the work. It is possible to do directly, but it's very complex and tricky to do well. And you have these big platforms that already know who you are, so you may as well leverage that to make your life easier. And the other side of that is if you're using a centralized platform for leveraging your identity, you can potentially make use of the economies of scale with that and start looking at some of the patterns in there to grant access.
Yeah, and thank you. That's like the perfect bridge in sort of what I wanted to ask you next. When it comes to, say, doing something directly, if you're on the dev side, right? Obviously, if you're at the high level side and you're running an enterprise organization, it's very bad. And dev side, especially if you're doing a proof of concept or something small, it's very tempting to do that simpler method. But he mentioned a word here, Bonnie mentioned the word of scale. When you scale those efforts out across different machines, different applications, different runtimes, right? A lot of other differences.
Also, even at like a dev level, if you think you're going to be deving a few projects in a similar way, say if your local dev process is through Kubernetes, if you set up a way for the local Kubernetes cluster to vouch for any workloads you deploy in it, then the next time you come to do it, you can just reuse that. You don't have to then create new credentials each time you do it. So even at a small level, you can implement this, but the real value comes in when you're doing it at sort of organization wide.
Yeah, and I mean, that's actually a really good example too, because even maybe if you've got one pet project, you can get away with it. But right, as soon as you get a few, as soon as it becomes an iterative thing, which kind of harkens back to one of our earlier episodes with Glenn Yu, who is like, you get the repetitions in, you have to like do a bunch of projects to get it. Like you just need something with a bit more scale. However, when we look at this myriad of something like an organization with all these systems, what you really wanted to get in today was how these foundations that you built at the beginning, mapping these relationships between these different pieces, is two things. One, it becomes foundational to everything else, right? And two, if you screw it up in the beginning or don't do it correctly, it can create a lot of headache later on. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, so as we were talking about, you have these trusted brokers who vouch your identity. As part of the identity that they're proving, they will give attributes about your identity. So in something like Kubernetes, it will give you a namespace and a pod and a service account that's used for it. In CI pipelines, it will often give you your sort of segment of your workspaces, which is often in CI split. So in GitLab, you may have a project, and then it has the pipeline that's running beneath that. So it has all these bits of identity. If you take the time at the beginning to look at the possible sources of identity that you're using for this verification and how you can structure those, you can then sort of sync these up between your different platforms, and then you can use templating. So a lot of this will revolve around Vault, the central piece of this. So you can template and Vault policies to take those components that are supplied when proving identity and have a generic template that allows segmentation for all of the workflows. They're all separated at policy level, but they have a single point of authentication, and you have one policy that can manage all of it for your that entire relation, which just means adding anything new to it is very simple. As long as you follow the same naming conventions and structures in there, it will just roll out. It will have the spaces set up for it, and it will be able to access secrets that are shared and available to it and needed for the runtime. So spending the time to think at the beginning, look at the possible sources of identity that you have to proof, and look at the areas you want access to, and spend the time to marry that up, and save you a lot of time down the road.
Yeah. So let me give you two examples of this, and you clarify and / approve of them. Say, yes, Cole, that was very good, or no, Cole, I'm leaving the stream now. Okay. Don't actually do that part. But so in terms of this, first up, what Barnaby was talking about, right, just from listening here, is we have some end goal that you as the machine or the user have, and that is to probably access something, whether that's a secret, whether that's creating a connection to another machine, or the like. Guarding whether or not you can do that is a policy. That policy says, yes, you can, or no, you can't, or yeah, you can, but with catch, right? Here's a few things. So let's start really high level, because in context of understanding why this helps you scale. If I have, and this is going to be the non-technical example, if I have a folder structure in my computer, and every time I want to like do, say, I don't know, receipts or new projects or something, I come up with an entire new folder structure, 100 bit away, and then I say, Barnaby, write me a policy that guards every new like project that I ever make. And Barnaby comes and looks at my folder structure and is like, dude, you name your root folder something different every time. Sometimes it's December, and sometimes it's like I don't know, a Game of Thrones character. Sometimes it's a Marvel character. Like, I don't know how to do this. So what would you tell me to do to change that structure such that you can create a policy that achieves this scale that you're talking about?
So essentially you want to have like a hierarchical structure. So if you have groupings that go down, and as you go down, you get more specific. So say we're working across multiple projects at a high level in the business. You may have accounting, sales, and maybe a sort of HR team. They'll all have segments in there, and they'll have common components in there. So the top level structure should map to those top level units, and then they may have different teams within them. So the layer below that, you start putting in those teams, and And then those teams may have individual projects, so you lay the projects out. And if ever you have a new team wanting to go into one of those units, you put them in that unit and then allow them to create their projects beneath that. So you're starting to see this logical structure of your folders. And this means you kind of have the information of what they should and shouldn't be able to do, and they're kind of placed in your organization, or in your case, placed in your projects hierarchy of where they relate to. And that will give you have an idea of what they will need access to an extent. Whereas if you kind of create a completely random set of things, you've lost that information. It's not present in the way you've structured it. So you'd need to pull it in another way, which makes things more complicated. It doesn't make it impossible. It just makes it more complicated to do and adds more work down the line. And if this is something you're going to be repeating a lot, if you can make the process as simple as possible to onboard new projects, it will save you a lot of time down the line, even though it may mean that you have to reorganize your entire desktop in this scenario.
Yeah, and this is where those scalable operations come to. But also, you mentioned something neat there, which is the feedback into this. How the structure isn't structure for itself; it's also information about the structure, right? This means that Barnaby can now say, "Hey, for any new team, right, that exists under this organization that we add, they can say access their own team." I can generally say that, and now I have a security policy, which, by the way, we can codify. So we could do that, say, in Vault to use certain secret engines or whatever. We can, with that general policy, automate the creation of new teams to be as secure as we needed to. But also, like Barnaby says, it sets up information for anyone else who comes and looks at it later to know, hey, there's a pattern. It is a pattern. Therefore, I can identify where something needs to be. I can pinpoint information a lot easier. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't really pay attention to the value that you can get out of hierarchical data. And so if you're going really the deep down level and you're managing data structures, if you have JSONs, you can have like nested things within them. The way those data structures are built can contain a lot of information, which means the actual size of them can be a lot smaller. Because you don't have to tell it at each level what it actually is. You know what it is from where it sits with it. And that's the same for the path-based approach or the project-based approach. If you structure them correctly, you get a lot of information just from that structure. So you don't need to then add all these labels telling you what it is. You can just look at it and go, well, it's in that group, it's under that folder structure. It obviously belongs to this.
And what's interesting here too is we'll attack the brownfield front here in a second, but in a perfect scenario, which for a lot of the devs and everyone is like, I get to start from scratch. I can do it exactly how I want. If you're thinking that this just applies to accessing information, this is information about your organization that is probably structured somewhat like this, right? You probably have, it is a hierarchy, so hopefully that's there like that. But also your machines themselves are going to have that as well. And that was one of the interesting pieces that you had mentioned was how, well, this structure, you can use this to define your aggregate system in terms of how your different identities actually communicate to each other. Like, what did you mean by that? How does that make that better?
So if you have this structure in the way your machines are built, you can use it to map to potentially where you store information that are required by the applications that run on those machines. So if you're working in the cloud, there's often ways you can group resources. Maybe it's just tagging, or if you're using something like Azure, it has resource groups and various subscriptions that you can put things into. And you can use these to then map to, in our case, we're using Vault as our secret store. So you can structure your namespaces or even just your paths if you're using Community Edition in a way that mirrors the structure of your infrastructure deployment. And then the way you deploy your infrastructure will automatically get access to, well, not automatically, there's a little bit of work to do setting up that base templating policy. But onboarding new infrastructure, it will have access to a segregated space in Vault where it can have secrets that are just unique to that. But because you also have that hierarchical nature, if there's something somewhere higher up the tree that's relevant for it, it should also automatically have access to that just by the benefit of being part of that branch of your structure.
Yes. So the next thing here is, well, I just said, well, what if it's clean slate, and you can just do it, which is not what most people have. We all have our baggage, don't we? Anyhow, I had a joke there, but it's since escaped me. So let's just keep moving on. For the brownfield folks, though, right? The ones of us that it's like, well, this sounds great, Barnaby, but I can tell you right now that all the relationships between all the machines, they are a winding mess of whatever. Right, we're gonna get more into the value of this and a little bit more high level here after we in this third idea. But in terms of like getting that point of, well, how do I deal with this if I've already got this in place? Is there hope for me? Like, give us a little teaser here in terms of how we might deal with that.
So there's two broad approaches to this. There is one where you go, the amount of effort it's going to be to get this all working is beyond the scope or the amount of effort we want to put in. What we're going to do is, we know we need to adopt a new base platform at some point. Say we're moving from Kubernetes and we're going to Nomad, because that's a much better solution and much more fun. But at that point, if you know maybe we'll have another stream about Nomad at some point.
All right, we're good. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. But anyhow,
yeah. So if you're moving like a core component of your platform, you can then go, actually, we're going to kind of cut and dry. We knew the old system wasn't perfect. Those relationships were a hassle. We're going to set up a new one, build it in a way where, almost like the greenfield approach, where you have your clear mappings and your hierarchical structures, and then any new project will be on board into that, and we'll slowly transition the old ones across. Okay. That may not be applicable to everyone. So option 2 is you expand the complexity of the interim layer. So when you have nice structures, it's a very simple mapping to do from, you have one structure which is a very similar style or topology to your other structure. That's a simple mapping. But the mapping is still there. You will have that knowledge in your organization, and depending on how non-aligned your platforms are will depend on how complex this can be, but you can essentially build that mapping. So you know that this team needs to map to that space, and then you'll have some automation that provisions policies. What you will end up with is a more complex set of policies, or at least a larger set of policies, because they can't rely on templating to the same degree. They'll have to be more unique to each particular relationship. But that's saying you can still then, and once you've mapped all the old ones, go pick your favorite pattern out of them, because you may as well use one that you already have, and going forwards, we will use that one exclusively, and that will be our standard. So you set up the templating for the one that is ideally most common, as it will save you the most amount of effort, and then say, going forward, we need to deploy this pattern to follow it, so any future rollouts can gain that benefit of scale.
Okay, I see. So to my understanding here, and tell me if this is correct, we have a system that's almost like my project folder structure, which I'm throwing myself in a bus here. I actually stay organized-ish. So anyhow, but let's say that it's not organized. It is a mess. Like the way I have my folders set up there, they're all over the place. And then we have Barnaby. He's like, look, this is probably how you should want to think about stuff. Okay, this is the policy structure. This is the structure with the data that I see. This is how you put in hierarchy. But Cole, you can't go and change everything. So we're going to put a middle layer here, almost like a translator, this interim layer that is going to bridge these two, to where when I write a particular policy, it's going to go and you do something in your system. The system's going to go to this translator and say, oh, okay, you meant for this particular policy in this new system, right? In this security pathing. Is that correct?
Yeah. The bit that you're getting around here, or you need to build in yourself, is when you have the perfect alignment, the components that are supplied as part of your identity validation are the bits that are your hierarchical structure. If they're not supplied as part of the identity validation, the trust relationship, you need to put in a way to map them in the system that's receiving it. So you need to essentially build some automation that will take how that fits in somewhere and inject that into the process of building up the policies. So you have to have that middle layer.
Right. And that's important to say, is like, if you've already got a system that's there, you are going to have some sort of middle layer that does have some custom automation in terms of translating those mappings, but it's not you keep doing it forever, which is what Barnaby mentioned, which is, well, so what you do is of those paths, of those middle pieces that you created, there is going to be one that is how you want to do it going forward. From that point forward, stuff in your messy relationships, as they were, start using the new way from that point forward, right? And that's how you can expand that and not be, ever dependent upon expanding that middle layer for every new piece to your system, right?
Yeah, and eventually certain apps and projects will get sunsetted and they will fall out, and if you change to a standard at a certain point, eventually everything will transition to it. And maybe some teams will go, actually, we see the value of being on that central pattern. We're going to spend the time to remap our application into the new pattern. So you can map old ones, and they can do it at their liberty because that pattern's there for them to use, but you make it so they can still work within your platform. You don't want to exclude someone and go, we're doing this new platform, everything's going to be great, but you did that wrong previously when we had no guidance, so you were excluded. You want to make sure everyone's using the platform, because otherwise they'll never come on board. And it's more likely that they'll transition to the newer pattern if they've already got one foot in the door.
That's a good point. Maybe we can touch some more on that in the last one in terms of onboarding, because if you're kind of middle, you're technical, or if you're a developer, this is probably making a good amount of sense. I'm sure some of our higher level audience are like, yeah, but why? Like, what are the results? And we'll get to that. But let's get even deeper and even more low level right now. Let's really scare the non-technical people away. No, I'm kidding. Come, we like you. Let's talk about the example that you said. Okay, well, here's a technical example of where trust is pretty wiry. There's a lot going on, and we need to get into it for what we're talking about today. And that was idea number 2 here, and that was the technical. So what did you want to talk about here, Barnaby?
So we're going to look at CI pipelines and sort of pipelines in general in your platform, because they end up touching pretty much all of the components of your system. So they have all of these bits that require identity, all of the bits that store secrets, and they kind of glue it together. And they're the bits that mesh all these bits together, interact with all of them. So they have a lot of relationships, a lot of things they need to trust, a lot of things they need to interface with. So it's where you'll see this the most and can get the most value out of it when you do it correctly.
I liked something you said too. It's like in terms of these pipelines, which was they're the glue of your platform. A CI/CD pipeline truly is the glue of your platform. And I know that this is mainly security focused, but I think this is important for everyone to understand if you're a developer or if you're security and you're not just a cloud engineer. Could you elaborate on that some?
So you have all these components that you put into your platform, but by themselves, they're just components. They're not a platform. You need a way to link them together. And often the way that they get linked together is through a CI pipeline. Some components integrate closer than others, but a lot of them need a little bit in between to glue them together. And that's where the pipeline fits in. It will take bits from one component and then give them to another to do something with. And that's why I refer to it as the glue.
And often, if anyone's ever set up a CI/CD pipeline, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? If you never set one up, you can really just imagine, like a factory line of many different people touching this thing as it goes and delivers the end product. There's a lot. Now, what you wanted to get into here was in terms of creating one or managing one, right? There was the how it's usually done, because Barnaby, you've worked with a lot of different customers, a lot of different firms, and you've seen a lot of pipelines, which is probably why you keep using plumbing. Well, I guess you've only used it once, but it's fitting for plumbing as an example, versus how you think it should be done. Can you give us sort of your ideas on both those, like how you've seen it done, how it's usually done versus how it should be done?
Yeah, we'll start with what I think is it should be done, and then we'll go into some of the things you often see and kind of explain a little bit why those happen and why they haven't gone into sort of what would be the ideal. So the ideal way is you use an identity broker. That is often your CI/CD platform will have a way to do this. Most of the big ones these days do. If not, you can often use JWT to take some of the structures from your pipeline tooling and use that to pass identity. And then what you're looking to do inside your pipeline tooling is structure things in a logical way, like we were talking about earlier. Get that hierarchical structure so that you have your high-level groups, and then below them you may have app teams, and then below them you may have projects, and at the bottom there'll be pipelines that are running on those projects. And that is what you're going to use to structure your identity and gain your access. So using that, we will say our secrets management tool is Vault, and we will structure Vault and the path bases within that to be the same structure as we have for that pipeline architecture. Sorry, the cat has just come to say hello.
I'm trying to. He's like, you said pipelines, like. I gotta come see this.
Yeah, but the way this works is you've got that structure, it maps to Vault, and then you can use templating within Vault. So in Vault, access is again path-based, so you can get it to be a very similar structure. We can use templating in Vault policy, which is the concept that some of the information you supply as proof of your identity, Vault can make use of this, and it's a very powerful feature. So you can put those into your paths dynamically. So both of these should be configured at the very top level of each of the components. And then with those policies, it will automatically give you access to things structured beneath them. And you'll often have multiple bits to this, and certain secrets that need to be shared will be at a higher level of these paths. And then bits that are very unique to the application will be at the bottom level of these paths. So they'll tie it all together. And then once you've set it up this way, it's very easy to onboard new teams and stuff, new applications to this, because you have a defined pattern. On your CI side, you have your identity broker at the top level, which knows the identity of all your pipelines. And then on the secret side, you have Vault, which has the sort of structure to go down into all the namespaces or subpaths, depending on how you want to build it. And then beneath those subpaths, you can put your various secrets engines, which can grant you dynamic access. If you're managing Vault with something like Terraform, because those pipelines might map to its cloud subscriptions or application teams, there'll be a mapping there. You can have a standard Terraform module that will just deploy a namespace for you, and it will take a very small subset because it doesn't need that much information, because it's all in that structural information to put those secrets engines in. So that's the ideal. Let's go to.
Well, hold up. Can I just real quick? Let me make sure that I've got this down, because I think this is perfect, because it piggybacks off what you talked about here in the first point, right? Which is we begin with this hierarchical structure. In this case, it's teams working on, let's say, specific services. Those services have specific, even more specific needs. In this case, every service probably has a pipeline that it needs, right? They're going to be using some CI service that's going to have its own junk to deal with. That's a terrible word for it, but in essence, in that CI service, you're also going to have to relay and input this hierarchical data, right? You're going to have to organize it because you're using this for your identity, right? This isn't just about in Vault setting up pathing and relationships to your organization. This is about every sort of service you do that has to interact with the system also following those same structures, such that when you write a one policy, or in your example there, you write one Terraform module, if it's interacting with multiple platforms, hey, if they're all using the same hierarchical data structure, right, these same relationships, you don't have to keep repeating yourself, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you don't have to redefine it every time. You are repeating yourself because it's the same pattern every time, but you build the automate because it's a pattern. You codify it once, you hit go, and you never have to worry about it again. So if you set it up correctly the first time, onboarding or expanding is very simple, as long as you don't hit a limit of capacity of something that you're using, and which will take a while. And also the benefit of doing this centrally, it gives you a little bit more capacity. Some of the things that often end up talking to some of the larger clients you work with, Vault has a limit to how many secrets engines you can set up. If you're having to create those every single time at the low level, you're going to create more of them than if you have just one at the top level that then delegates access all the way down. So there's
that's a really good
well.
That's a really good specific technical example, especially for the Vault folks out there, because that's a pretty common question. Like, how should I structure like pathing and secrets engines in there? And it's like, well, yeah, in this case, start really well with one, make the most of each engine as opposed to just brand new ones each time. So,
and it's something that is very easy to overlook because it works perfectly until it doesn't. And then you can't scale. And all of a sudden you're having to spin up a new cluster, which is, it's not too bad. Vault's pretty easy to set up, but it's not something you want to do in an unexpected manner.
Yeah.
But so I guess we'll loop back to the original question of what is it that I'll see often. So often what people have is they haven't set up that trust relationship or the identity broker at the top level. So what happens is they are going to have to essentially they either submit credentials manually to the pipeline because they will use it off their user, or they have set things up in a way that is very sort of pipeline specific. So each time they want to onboard a new team, they have to go through the process of creating all of the things manually for them to do that, which can be very time intensive. And a lot of this is just because when they started it, it wasn't considered about scaling. They were said, one team says, oh, I want to use this product, to bring it in. And then someone says, oh, can I come along? And they're like, yeah, sure, join us. And there was never that sort of whole system thinking at the beginning of the process. It was wasn't centrally designed. It was just allowed to sprawl. So there wasn't naming conventions and those structures set up. So it's not because people are intentionally doing things wrong. It's just often sometimes I do question it, but most of the times it's sort of things weren't initially thought of as a final solution. It's something people brought in. It turns out it was useful, and then it grew in a way that it was never thought about of reaching the scale of a whole organization. So they didn't put that planning in at the beginning. And there's a lot to be said about sort of whole system thinking, how things are going to work end to end, and what the sort of scale that a solution could possibly get to. Because if you have this at the start, it doesn't take that long to go through, look at the kind of possibility of how large something can get with an organization, and then look at structuring it in a way that can scale to that. It'll maybe take you a few more days of planning, if that. And then once you implement it and you set that up, it's there and it's scalable. There may be a few tweaks later down the line, but you have a good foundation to expand off.
That's a really, I mean, I like how Barnaby was like, so if your stuff looks really bad, it's only kind of your fault. But no, it does make sense, right? It's an evolution. When a small team starts, if they're like a startup, or even if they're just a small team within an enterprise and they start something, it's just like how you said, it's a series of evolutions that aren't necessarily thinking about the bigger picture. There's also the technology changes, business requirements change, team members, the expertise change, and the next thing you know, you have to hire Barnaby, right? So that kind of first up, is there any more in that second point, or can we go to the third point?
No, I think that kind of wraps it up on the second point.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that organic growth.
Yeah, and that is probably like one of those things is if you're in the higher level, if you're making the decisions on whether to pursue something like this, it's like, well, we aren't blank slate, or hey, we are, but we want to move quickly. I don't quite get this, or any of those other things. So this third point kind of addresses the why. Like, what is the third point here, Barnaby?
So we're going to look at kind of the business value of this, what you actually get back from spending those few extra days at the start if it's greenfield, or spending the time to build that complex mapping if you've already deployed it. So what is this actually going to give you? Because we've talked a lot about this, and we've maybe mentioned that it makes a dev's life easier because they can just hit go on their pipeline and not think about it. And I guess that is a little bit of the core of it, but we'll expand why you should actually care about that. And it's time saving at the end of the day. If you make processes simpler to do, it means you have to spend less time doing them. So that will allow people who are using these platforms to spend more time delivering what the business cares about, the application development. That is what they're hired for at the end of the day. They're not hired to run pipelines. They're hired to build features for products. And the other side of things, if you set this up correctly at the start, you have a secure model for this. So what you're deploying is secure, and you have the confidence that you're not exposing things in your pipelines that you shouldn't be. That's one we see a lot, because people go, I need a cred to authenticate to do something, and they'll put a command in the pipeline to get it, and it'll just be written in the logs. And it may be long-lived, or they'll maybe have a username and password that they store in a CI tool that is stored in a sensitive place, but it's quite easy to get it out if you know what you're doing. So it makes it harder to gain those accesses if you're using those trusted identity, because you have to be the machine that's running it. You can't just steal it and run it from your own laptop. You don't have access to the API that signs the token.
Right. So there's kind of a question for you there. So I really like how you put that at the beginning, because people are gonna ask, well, like, how much? Like, how much will it give me? Well, the reality is it depends on what you currently have. But Barnaby's reality here is what you're trying to get to is sort of that fun inception that every dev gets at the beginning, is where I just cut a release and it goes live. The issue is I'm just cutting a release. There's no security in place. There's nothing in place. There's a lot of risk that comes in with that. There's a lot of, it's very error prone. How do we get back to it? How do we audit it? How do we do all of these things? But in theory of speed, that's as fast as it gets. I write it, I push it, it's live. He's saying that, hey, let's get back to that, and tell me if it's correct. Let's get back to that beautiful almost genesis of where we have that speed, but let's make it so that when you do that, it actually is secure. It actually is automated. You actually do understand what's going on, and you can, with peace of mind, actually have that release go out and deploy and be in front of your users. Is that right, or is that terribly wrong?
I'm going to caveat it with, it's nearly right. So you'll never be able to get quite back to the 100% of release it, no security concerns, it goes, because there is a computational time associated with going out, authenticating, and also we should mention here, there should be some automated testing in that process as well. It's not really the scope of the talk. You'd hope there's testing to stop releases just going into prod and breaking everything, but it would be maybe sort of 10-15% time difference to that instead of sort of thousands. So some of the places that we've gone into, and they've had a very sort of manual approach, and you go through all these security checks, people having to trigger off pipelines. We've shaved some things down from taking days to do to minutes.
Holy hell.
Is just
days to minutes.
Yeah. So
wait. I feel like I have a like I need to put something. Why do this? Take it from days to minutes. Watch this. Here we go. Yeah, there we go. Right. And it's on the screen. Yeah.
The mileage will vary with how much it saves, because it very much depends on how far down your automation journey you are at the point where you start bringing these in. If you're quite a way down it, but you just haven't quite got the trust relationships down, what it will do, it will speed it up, because you won't have to manually trigger things, or it will make it more secure, so you won't necessarily see those kind of massive savings. But if you're moving from a fully manual process where the verification checks and manual checks, and the credential providing is manual and going to generate them as manual, you can see those kind of savings in this. So
yeah. And I bet that comes to be something we talk a lot about in terms of HashiCorp, I mean, it's all automation, right? It's removing the ticket-based process. It's removing the manual steps from all of it. And that kind of takes us so first up, that is the risk aspect of it, right? We're taking the risk out of someone messing up that manual injection of a credential, which both adds speed, also decreases the risk. However, we've talked about this, and you brought this up. This becomes then a black box, and you as a developer may get it, but there's something to be said from the peace of mind of doing the manual piece, especially as a decision maker, because otherwise it's a black box and it kind of looks like magic. This is sort of that culture thing you talked about, right? In terms of how do you get an organization to buy into this when it can appear automagical?
Yeah, so I guess the other side that we didn't really talk about that much during this, but if you have these trust relationships that are very scoped to individual pipelines, because they're providing all of their information of who they are when they run is also provided when they make the request. It's very easy to audit these systems because you have full details of everything that's done within it. And you see this pipeline made this request to get access to this secret at this time. And you can be fairly confident that that is associated with a certain workflow. You can go to the CI tool and see who triggered it or the commit that triggered it in a GitOps workflow. So you have that clear traceability. Whereas if you have manual credentials, that credential may be used across many pipelines that that person is responsible for running. And the audit traces this credential was used, and in really worst case scenarios, that credential may be shared by multiple people. So that makes it very hard to track down what went wrong or if there was a leak, where it came from. Whereas if it's very scoped, with this very defined audit trail. The other benefit of this, we have those trust relationships. That person never needs to see that credential. So there is no risk of them accidentally leaving their laptop on a train with the password as a sticky note on top of it, and someone finding that and go, ooh, fun company laptop, I wonder what I can find in here, because they don't have it and they have no need to have it.
That's seriously a huge piece of it. Is it's almost like, well, sure, there may be a black box how it works, but I can show you every single thing that's happening, because since it's automated, it's not just the speed, it is every single thing that's getting logged. It's happening since we've reworked the data structures to be hierarchical, to where the relationships make sense, to where there's patterns. It's a lot easier to make sense of those incoming metrics and audit logs so that you can see where everything's going. So is that how you would then, if I'm a dev and I'm trying to take this up the decision maker, you'd sort of push out, say, hey, here's how you would encourage to get this to happen?
Yeah, there's a two sides to it. It depends what the decision maker you're talking to. If it's security, you talk to them about how you're reducing your threat surface because your credentials are more tightly scoped and less people have access to them. If you're talking about someone that's maybe a release manager or sort of more in charge of product features, you talk to them more about the increased speed of deployment and the repeatability of it, so they can potentially have a higher cadence of releases adopting this kind of methodology. So those are the kind of the two prongs that you can use to sell this, and pick your target audience when choosing your prong.
Nice. You can tell that Barnaby's had to go in and convince people in terms of changing their ways to a much better path. Ha! That was kind of a pun. I didn't even mean to do that. But anyhow.
Just it slowly incepted paths into your mind today after talking about them so often.
Very nice. So what are three sort of, let's do one more quick thing here, which is in the hard situation. That hard situation being, okay, fine, I've got to buy in. Like we can get this done. However, my system is kind of a mess right now. Give me sort of like three things that I can do to kick this process off.
So the first thing to do is go and properly look at your system, see what the components you have are, and see what they have available to prove their identity. Because you may have a lot of the components already there, you may just not be utilizing them. So see what's there. If you're using a trusted platform, see if you can leverage that to take away some of it. So that's the first step. Then look at the patterns you have. If you already have some of these trust relationships set up, if they're very different across applications, look for the one that you either think suits your organization the best or is being used with the highest frequency in your organization, because that often indicates that people like that pattern more than other ones.
Okay.
And look at replicating that across as a standard to go forwards with. Mm-hmm. And then look at the kind of final part is look at where you're storing the information that is secret or you're trying to grant access to with these trust relationships, and see if you have common structures in there that you can use for this mapping, and if that's structured in a way. And it's often easier to update the mapping of the place that stores the information rather than the place that's requesting it, because will be a small API call change instead of moving a load of stuff around in CI pipeline. So if you have the time and want to rebuild it, look at moving things around. And if you just if you don't want to rebuild anything, pick a pattern that is common and gives the most information in that topology, and try and standardize around that going forward. So at least in future you have consistency and can leverage the power of the repeatable patterns.
Nice. All right, so we're almost here at the top. So let's close out. Give me like, obviously we've talked about a lot here today, but if you had to throw this into a very quick abstract, very quick sort of like elevator pitch in context of what's your ideas, this summary, what is that, Barnaby?
Yeah, so I guess the summary of what we talked about is you want to use identity brokers where you can, as they can pull away some of the complexities of proving who you are and build those trust relationships between the components of your platform. Once you've got those trust relationships, look at structuring them in a way that requires minimal configuration to add new teams on. So building standard patterns and standard structures within them that can just be repeated and rolled out over and over again. So it will make your future deployments more secure as you have very scoped access, and it also allows you to speed up the deployment pipelines as you can automate pretty much the whole process. So once that PR is merged, it just goes.
Nice. All right. Well, that brings us sort of to the end here. I know, Barnaby, you had a few things that you wanted to push up here. I'm going to just sort of put these links up, and I'll let you kind of tell us about them as we go. This first one is Twitch TV link.
Yeah, so this is some shameless self-promotion. So myself and a couple of the other HashiCorp ambassadors, so James and Wale, we stream on Mondays, and we are building our own little platform where we have a Nomad cluster. We're in the process of getting it backed by console. It's all integrated with Vault, and we're trying to do things in a very sort of platform engineering, very automated way. And we have all these trust relationships in our platform because we're too lazy to add credentials to a pipeline every time. So we very much automate everything. So if you want to come chat with us while we're building the platform and see some of these components in more detail and some of the technical side, we stream at 7 p.m. UK time on Mondays if you want to join us.
Nice. And then I'm guessing this link here is related to that, yeah?
Yeah, if you can't make that particular time slot, as I know we probably have quite an international audience, we push all of our videos to YouTube, so you can go through the series thus far and maybe look into a certain episode that interests you. Maybe we're fiddling with TLS certificates in console, and that's something that you want to look into. So all of the streams are pushed to YouTube afterwards for people to catch up on.
Nice. And then another one here. Wonder what this
is
could be.
That name's pretty unique. I don't think there's another Barnaby Hurst on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to connect and talk more about this stuff, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I will happily talk about this. As you can see, we've been chatting for an hour already.
And then one more here, right?
So this is the final one. So I'm currently working as a consultant at Global Logic. So if you want to hire my skills directly, and are more interested to do this, so we do a lot of platform engineering work, not just around HashiCorp products as well. We do wider pieces. So if you have a need for professional services around this and want us to come and help you with it, this is the link to their website, and we will happily come and help with any platform engineering related work.
All right, I think that's it. Although I still like your quote here. Because it's a good point. It's a good point. But thank you so much, Barnaby, for taking the time to work with me to put together the agenda and bringing this awesome idea and the different sub points that you had under it. Thanks to everyone who showed up and left some comments and watched, and everyone after the fact who tunes in to watch as well. Do you have any other closing thoughts, Barnaby?
I'd just say go and look if you have a platform or bits of components that you think could be a platform. Go and have a look at the components, see what you could use as identity. You might be surprised at how much of this you already have in place. So go explore, and the more people implement this, the easier it will be if ever we need to come and help you with other things.
He's like, please clean your house before I come visit. Okay.
Yeah, this is all selfish. I just want my job to be easier at the end of the
day. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. And everyone else, look forward to more episodes of the HashiCorp Ambassador Thought Leader series. We've got our next one here coming up with Michael Aldrich. So we'll see that here soon. But until next time, thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.